and welcome to Monday, a News 5 special report. I'm Twyla Young.
And I'm Phil Wilson. We'll be here every first and third Monday to examine some important issues, profile unusual people, and look at some interesting events.
Tonight, we're going to be looking inside 2 Iowa jails, following the progress of a flock of wild geese and checking up on an unusual battle of the bands.
In case you had any doubt that America uses an appalling amount of the world's energy, consider this. Our air conditioners today consume as much energy as all the energy used in China. Just air conditioners. Now add to that, we're increasing our use of energy at a startling rate. If the current trend continues, each of us will use twice as much energy by the year 2000. Where's it all going to come from? And what role will nuclear power play in meeting the energy demands of central Iowa? That's the subject of tonight's first report. We Americans have an insatiable appetite for energy. These are some of the ways we use it and waste it. Our use of energy involves every segment of society, and each segment is using more each year. In 1850, almost all our energy was supplied by burning wood and by using the power of water. Since then, both sources have declined in importance. The huge growth has been supplied by fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. But supplying and burning enormous quantities of fossil fuels today is causing serious problems. And if we keep on at the present rate, in the next 3 decades, our demands for energy will triple. Can we supply these demands? It may be impossible. Consider one part of the problem, generating electricity. Demand for electricity is doubling every 10 years. This means we'll have to build as much generating capacity in the next 10 years as we have in all our history. How will Iowa, which receives 98% of its energy supply from other states, cope with rising energy demands? Increasingly, it is turning to nuclear power. But nuclear power plants haven't always been reliable. Several weeks ago, Iowa's only nuclear plant was shut down after it was discovered that leaks had developed in the reactor's cooling pipes. The plant remains closed, and officials of Iowa Electric and Power, operators of the reactor, refuse to let us take pictures inside the building. But the plant at Palo supplies only 15% of the electrical needs of the state. Far more important to central Iowa is the Cooper nuclear reactor at Brownsville, Nebraska. It supplies 50% of the energy used by Iowa Power and Light Company, the largest electric and gas utility in the state. The television set you're watching gets part of its electricity from nuclear power. What would happen here in central Iowa if the nuclear station in Nebraska shut down?
Well, that would call for substituting electric power from some other source. There would be several alternatives. Chances are we'd look very quickly to the cheapest electric capacity available from some other utility company in a 9-state area, because we are tied together through a grid system, and do that very quickly, obviously, trying to get the cheapest capacity available to meet that need, and of course hope that the facility would be back as soon as possible.
The use of nuclear power has prompted widespread protests by environmentalists. Among their concerns, the question of how to safely dispose of radioactive nuclear waste, which has a lifespan of tens of thousands of years.
The costs of isolating the radioactive wastes from the biosphere for many thousands of years, what it means in terms of people to watch over and maintain this type of integrity to see that it does not leak into the environment.
Dr. Paul Barkas, an engineering professor at Iowa State University, is among those who believe radioactive waste can be safely buried underground, and he contends there are other acceptable methods of storing nuclear waste.
One of these is burial in the deep ocean trenches. That is the Mindanao Trench, Tonga, Philippine Trench, and the Japan Trench, which extend down 37,000 feet below sea level and which are being carried under the continent of Asia by movement of the tectonic plates.
But the public at large is not so easily persuaded. In a random sampling we took, most people didn't know what to do with nuclear waste, but they know they don't want it around them.
I imagine if they could ship it off to the moon, it'd be okay.
I haven't thought too much about that.
I don't know. I know we have to do something.
What's your feeling about the problem of disposing of radioactive nuclear waste?
Well, now that can be a bit of a problem.
Well, I don't want any in Iowa very badly.
The controversy about nuclear power plants and their wastes isn't likely to cool down anytime soon. In the meantime, nuclear energy is supplying electric power to many American communities, cities and towns that could be hard-pressed to find enough energy from a shrinking supply of fossil fuels. But the hope for the future lies elsewhere, still a distant dream, and far from this planet.
So I think solar energy is going to be the energy of the future, very much so, because of our finite supply of fossil fuels here on Earth.
We'd like to thank Churchill Films and the film production unit of Iowa State University for bringing us some of our pictures. Twyla?
Earlier this month, a killer fire struck in Des Moines, and there are still a lot of unanswered questions surrounding that tragedy.
Saw the light smoke coming out of the top of the building over there about 9:30, and I yelled at my boss, Richard Higgins, and told him, I said, Yonkers on fire. And he looked over there and he said, sure enough it is. So we called the fire department, and about that time the fire just shot right out of the door and the black smoke just covered the entire store.
That was 2 weeks ago yesterday, on that quiet Sunday morning when only a few people had reported to work at the Merle Hay Yonkers store. Hours before it was to open, it literally burst into flames. The blaze burned on for hours. Then word spread that the firefighters had come upon bodies. It was the next day before the worst was known. In all, 10 people had died. It was the worst fire tragedy in the history of Iowa's capital city. It took several days for Des Moines even to grasp the tragedy itself. It was a week of memorial services and cleanup, a week of reassessment for other members of the retail community, and a week of silence from Yonker officials about any and everything concerning the fire. But by early last week, life was pretty much back to normal in the rest of Merle Hay Shopping Plaza. Merchants there were eager to get on with the Christmas shopping season and, without being unseemly about it, to encourage customers to come to Merle Hay to shop their stores and try not to think about the absence of the huge Yonker store and the tragedy there. At the Yonker end of the mall, though, the tragedy was turning into a mystery. Days had passed with investigators and firemen sifting through the rubble looking for clues as to how the fire started. But as one observer said, they're finding things, they just don't know yet what they mean. One of the questions that has been repeatedly raised concerning this fire is the lack of automatic sprinklers in the Yonkers Merle Hay store. Although sprinklers are required in such stores now, they were not when this store was built 19 years ago, and Yonkers has not been required to install them more recently since the building has not undergone major remodeling since it was built. That's the law. However, the economics of the situation probably entered into a decision not to install the sprinkler system as well. One person involved with commercial sprinkler systems in Des Moines says that it would probably have cost about $90,000 to install sprinklers in this building when it was built. To add sprinklers to a building like this today would cost somewhere in the vicinity of $180,000. However, it has been estimated that the investment in sprinkler systems can be recovered in 5 to 10 years in insurance savings alone. Other stores in the mall are protected by sprinklers. The Sears store, built at the same time as the Yonkers, was originally built with a sprinkler system. Sears officials say that because of the demands of their insurance carriers and their own policies, most of their stores' fire protection systems, including sprinklers, generally exceed the standard of local fire codes. Sears is not the only major department store in the Des Moines area so covered, though. Indeed, the Yonkers store at Merle Hay Mall was apparently the only one that was not. Although some people involved in fire protection systems have speculated privately that sprinklers in the Yonkers store might have slowed the fire to the extent that 1 or 2 of the victims could have been saved, most agree that the fire spread so quickly that any system would have been nearly useless in controlling the blaze. Still, the question why? Why, in this day of sophisticated construction practices, advanced fire alarm and protection systems, and thorough safety codes, can such a thing occur? Is it possible to build a fireproof building?
Well, there may be a fireproof building if we're just talking about the building. However, when you start moving contents into it, well, there is no fireproof contents. So this requires you put a big fire load in a fireproof building, and you can have a enormous fire inside of this building.
There has been talk of a nearby gasoline leak causing the blaze, or at least making it much worse than it might otherwise have been. There have been any number of theories advanced, all of which, according to Williams, are being checked out, none of which satisfy the investigators. And that brings us back to the mystery. What caused this fire? The simple answer is that no one knows, and we may never know.
Each day we cover more area of the store in our investigation, and we're making progress this way. However, progress in finding cause, we haven't come up with anything as yet. Sometimes investigations go on 2 and 3 years. However, not continually like this one is, because of the fact we lost 10 lives here and we've had a great monetary loss. We're spending continual time on this until we come up with some kind of an answer, or we find that we can't get an answer. There's always that possibility in any fire where there's been so much consummation of the contents and part of the building that the evidence that you're looking for, or the origin of fire you're looking for, is impossible to find.
Yonker officials still are not talking about the disposition of their Merle Hay store or how they intend to employ the 400 individuals who used to work there, although it does appear that most of the full-time employees, at least, are being placed at Yonker stores in the Des Moines area.
Twyla, since it looks like Yonkers wasn't in any apparent violation of the fire codes, do you think this is looking like it might lead to any changes in the regulations?
Well, Phil, it's too early to tell yet. Of course, there's been no official noise been made about that subject yet. And we haven't seen the public outcry and about fire codes and their enforcement that we saw after the Coronado apartment fire a year and a half ago that killed 5 people in Des Moines. And even if there are some changes to be made, it probably will be some time yet before we even know what those changes are. Well, now we're going to take you to another part of the state, to the marshland of north central Iowa, where a project is underway to save and restore an important part of our natural environment.
There's desire for people to see wild geese because they stir the emotions of most people. You know, it's really a great experience to see a flock of geese traversing the sky or whatever. And you know, to see a brood of goslings, rewarding. And I think that the public, if we have that ability and opportunity, it's money well spent.
Richard Bishop is talking about giant Canada geese. This enormous game bird is like its relative, the regular Canada goose, but it's half again as large. Some weigh more than 16 pounds. Giant Canada geese used to be plentiful in the upper Midwest, but over the years the large free-flying flocks dwindled, and eventually, so everyone thought, they disappeared altogether. But what you see here is part of the result of a 14-year program to bring this spectacular bird back from the brink of extinction.
The giant Canada goose was once a native nesting species here in a prairie country. When the settlers first came to Iowa, when they first came to this rich prairie country, they found giant Canada geese nesting on all these marshes, and they used them for eggs to eat and their young and the adults for food. And continued drainage of wetlands in this area for agriculture and the use of the young and for eggs for food finally depleted the population. And what we're really doing is, if you want to put it that way, we're righting a wrong to nature. And we're bringing these birds back and reestablishing them in their natural nesting areas, and the birds have responded.
This is Rice Lake in far north-central Iowa's marshland. The Iowa Conservation Commission has 4 sites in this part of the state where breeding pairs of giant Canada geese form the backbone of the Commission's restocking program. This 10-acre pen sits inside a 120-square-mile refuge. There are artificial nests built here, and during the winter, food and protection for those wing-clipped birds who live here year-round. The young are allowed to fly free. Outside this refuge, they can be hunted just like regular Canada geese. Canada goose hunting is popular in this part of the state, and it's one of the reasons that the Commission has embarked on this program.
it will increase the opportunity for Iowa sportsmen to harvest a Canada goose. If you don't protect them, then you're not going to keep them around long because they're very vulnerable on the breeding grounds. But if you give them some type of protection, like we have here at Rice Lake, and we have at all the other goose flocks, an area that's closed that they can leave the marsh areas and go out to feed without being shot at all the time, you'll protect enough of the birds to make the flocks go. And the success of this program, has been shown out in northwest Iowa. It's been, it's great. And we do harvest a number of birds of the giant Canada geese over there, but the population is still expanding probably at a greater rate than what our habitat can handle. And I think that's probably why we're seeing some of the birds go to Minnesota.
To give you some idea of just how large these birds are, a duck hunter might expect to bag a drake mallard that weighs about 2.5 pounds. A pheasant hunter would probably be very happy with a 3-pound bird. And if you shot an 8 or 9 pound regular interior Canada goose, you would probably be very happy. But if you were going for a male giant Canada goose, you could expect a bird that weighed 13 pounds or so.
Yeah, they're a big bird. They're a tremendous bird, especially when you go to grab one to band him or something. If in the wintertime when we're driving these birds up to check them for band numbers, and we weigh them and take some measurements, and we also clip some of the birds or pull their clip primary so they'll be able to fly come spring. And man, sometimes they'll hit you with their wing bone, and boy, they'll catch you on the wrist or something when your hands are cold or in your nose, and oh, it just feels like they just broke you. But they can be rather ornery, and but you realize how big and powerful they are when you try to handle them.
The success of the program means that eventually these breeding pens with their wing-clipped adults and their special wintering facility can be phased out. But Bishop says there will always be the refuge to protect these growing flocks when they breed, and to ensure that whether you're hunting or just enjoying the sights and sounds of these birds, there will always be a chance to see them. Why do you like Canada geese?
I can't tell you an answer to that, but they're just a majestic bird. I think everybody today has enjoyed just watching those birds. It thrills you when you see them take off. I think they probably represent the pristine wilderness area, because we work on the other subspecies of interiors up on the Hudson Bay coastline, and it is just quite an experience to walk across that tundra up there, where not many white men have been, and the ancestral home of the regular Canada goose. And it's just, it's quite a thrill to see them going through the area, and it's nice to have them here in Iowa.
They are beautiful birds.
Indeed, and huge.
They're enormous.
When we return, we'll visit the Polk County Jail to see how it compares with one of the more modern jails in the state.
Culligan Systems can cut energy bills for your business. Save water, save gas, save electricity. A major example, only 1/8 inch of scale in boilers, heaters, and pipes can cost you 16% wasted energy. Culligan stops this and other kinds of energy waste. Call for a Culligan water survey. Save money and energy.
Nearly every Iowan has a Culligan man. Find yours in the white pages of your phone book and call
the Culligan man.
If you've ever owned an extraordinary suit, you'll understand what we're all about. At Foreman & Clark, a beautiful suit happens from the inside out. The fabric, the cut, the tailoring, when the quality's there, it shows. So when you buy a suit at Foreman & Clark, it's because you don't need to settle for less.
Recently, Polk County voters turned down a ballot proposal to build a new county jail to replace the crumbling structure in Des Moines. It lost by only a handful of votes in failing to get the necessary 60% majority. Tonight, we'll visit another jail nearby that represents a dramatic contrast. Saturday night at the Polk County Jail, a woman is being booked for aggravated drunkenness and assaulting a deputy. The booking occurred as we were paying a midnight visit to the jail. We'd hoped to film some of the intense activity that usually takes place here on a lively Saturday night. As it turned out, it was exceptionally quiet. The woman was the only person booked between midnight and 4 a.m. But it gave us a chance to get a first-hand look at the jail and to understand what the recent ballot controversy was all about. It didn't take long to realize that the jail is a dump.
Over here is the main support beams. They're splitting apart, crumbling away. The cross beams, the east-west beams, they're crumbling and falling apart, and they're separating from the main beams in the east wall over here, which allows for this side of the building to settle.
One inmate is no stranger to the Polk County Jail. He's been here twice before and has spent time in 8 other jails.
Say the conditions are worse than any of the other jails I ever was in.
The jail was built in 1907. Although the building's been condemned several times, it stays open because there's nothing to take its place. It was built to house 146 inmates, but it's often overcrowded, jeopardizing the safety of prisoners and personnel.
The way the jail's built, we have to put felons of various degrees together. In some cases, misdemeanors and felons are together. The tough guy and the passive guy, in some cases, gets put together. And in this place, it's the survival of the fittest. The strong dominate the weak.
By any criteria, the Polk County Jail fails to measure up to modern jail standards. It's falling apart, it's unsanitary and unsafe. At best, it is barely manageable, and at worst, it is a disaster. In contrast, the Story County Jail in Nevada, built 10 years ago to replace the aging structure that had housed prisoners since before the turn of the century. The Story County Jail has been cited as one of the best jails of its type in the state. Iowa penal authorities who recently inspected the jail gave it a score of 382 points out of a possible perfect score of 399.
The jail here hardly provides comforts of, say, a Holiday Inn, but nevertheless, it's far better, cleaner, and more secure than the antiquated facility for Polk County.
Of course, it's relatively new, and we try to keep it clean, have good food, and the management or the people that work here, we think, try to do a good job with the people that are incarcerated here.
In addition to prisoners from Story County, the jail houses federal prisoners, primarily because the jail is judged to be secure. Persons charged with crimes in Boone County also are brought here because Boone has no jail. For this, Story County is paid $22 a day per prisoner. The jail has a series of closed-circuit TV cameras to monitor inmate activity. It also has a room for attorney-client meetings and a locked elevator to transport prisoners directly to the courtroom. The inmates we talked with preferred to be elsewhere, say on the beach at Acapulco, but their comments on jail conditions generally were favorable.
How does this compare to other jails you've been in?
Well, this is a lot cleaner and better jail than other jails I've been. I'm not from here, so I don't know what the other jails in Iowa are like. I'm from Kentucky.
But other jails generally are worse than this.
Right.
Although conditions are tolerable, escape attempts are not unknown here.
We've never had any escapes. There's been a lot of attempts. They've taken the light fixtures out a few times, but when they find out there's bars welded over the top, there isn't any place to go.
Aside from security and improved conditions, a modern structure doesn't in itself assure that things will run smoothly. According to Lieutenant Beavers, there's a very human element at work that is vital to harmonious relations.
If you treat a man like a man instead of an animal, they return the respect.
Phil, since the bond issue in Polk County for a new jail failed, what are they going to do now?
It's uncertain, Twyla, but there is some effort being made to get federal funds to perhaps at least pay for part of it, a new jail.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens there. So many times when we watch television or listen to the radio, we forget that some other things are taking place as well. For one thing, while we are being entertained, somebody is making money. In Des Moines, there is a race on between 2 radio stations that most people didn't even know about 2 years ago. Reporter Michael Mahoney has checked into the situation, one station on the AM band and one on the FM. Mahoney says it's truly a battle of the bands.
There is a battle raging for the hearts and minds of a part of the Des Moines radio audience. But it's not the usual fight, because this confrontation involves a piece of the audience some people do not feel are important.
That's Chicago on FM 95, KGGO, feeling stronger every day. Before that, we heard Blue Collar Man, Sticks from their latest LP called Pieces of Eight. Started things off that set with Prism, and the title cut of their latest album called See Forever Eyes. This morning,
They used to call stations like this underground radio or progressive because they did not play top 40 songs. Their forte was album cuts.
We'll be right back.
But that era ended, and it has been replaced by something the jocks call AOR, album-oriented radio.
60s are over. That approach to radio, to music, was especially good for the times in the late 60s and early 70s, but the idea of underground radio is dying out. And it's becoming much more commercial.
Mike Meacham, the program director for KCBC, one of a handful of AOR stations in the country on the AM band. For 2 years, KC14, as it's called, has had the segment of the market to itself, until this summer.
This is Album Rock, FM 95, KGGO Des Moines.
The goals are to make everyone comfortable with the station, whether you're, 35 years old and you like Boston, or you're 18 years old, you like Styx, to get a little of everything in there for you.
By most standards, O'Brien and the format on FM 95 should have the upper hand. Often the types of people who listen to album rock have relatively sophisticated sound systems that often include an FM tuner, so the music can be played in stereo.
And as long as we continue programming what people in this particular area like, we don't anticipate any trouble. And the fact that we're stereo doesn't hurt at all.
Yeah.
The only disadvantage I can see that we've had trouble with is our signal. Our research, through our research, we found that there's very little difference between AM and FM listenership anymore.
Now these two stations are locked in a fight to the death. They are in a rating period that will play a big part in determining whether or not Des Moines' market can support two stations of this kind.
Definitely for both AOR stations in town, it's going to be, both books are going to be very important. I would say that the second book, or the spring book, would be more likely to decide any changes.
You're not going to stay in this format forever if it's not a winner.
Right. If it doesn't go over with the public, we will be punk country or something, I don't know.
Both these stations think that the Des Moines market can support them both, at least for a little while. But both O'Brien and Meacham are quick to point out that if the hard rock format turns out to be a loser, they'd drop it in a minute. Which is interesting because try as they might to convince the listener that they're there for the music, if the rating points and the bucks disappear, so would the station. This is Michael Mahoney for Monday.
And that's Monday, News 5 special report for this evening. We'll be back here again December 4. Hope you can join us then.
By the way, Twyla, I'm doing a series on energy, including solar energy, that'll be on this week during our nightly news.
Well, we'll be sure to watch. For Phil and me, good night.